Hey guys, Bud Elliott here, back again on Cover 3. This is my summer school series. I'm talking Arkansas, and there's only one place to go for Arkansas. You see the QR code on the screen. That's my man, Trey Biddy, right there of HawgSports, the foremost source on everything Arkansas. Trey, welcome back to the show, man.
It's good to be back with you, Bud. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you guys doing an awesome job over there. I read the
Thanks.
board all the time. Hopefully, you guys will excuse my voice, flu game stuff, but we really can't reschedule these with Elite 11 coming up. So, Arkansas last year, the record I felt like they were a better team than the
Mhm.
record indicated. That they struggled with a lot of injuries. I know my friend Bill Connolly had them as a top 25 power rated football team. They did finish 7-6, so like a little disappointing on the record, but at least some good signs of progress in on the field, even if it didn't always translate to wins.
Yeah, I think they had a lot of things that, maybe internally that we saw them address in the offseason. And, really a lot of it comes down to KJ Jefferson and his health. Last year, they didn't have a quality option at backup quarterback, and they lost KJ for 2 games. They lost both of those games also. He was also really hobbled and probably shouldn't have played in the Liberty game. Again, they lost coming down to the goal line. Should not have lost that game and probably would have played another option at quarterback if they felt better about it. So they lost the Liberty game. They lost Mississippi State. They had no chance of winning that game on the road in Starkville without KJ Jefferson. And they lost the LSU game at home 13-10 because they couldn't muster any offense without Jefferson. If they split those 2 games that he didn't play in, and he was healthy for the Liberty game, or they had a quality backup option at quarterback, maybe we're talking about Arkansas winning 9 games and doing the same thing that they did before. But I think that's something that's easy to kind of overlook, that you didn't have your starting quarterback for two of those losses. So I think they did a good job in the offseason going out and getting Jacoby Criswell, who was backing up Drake May last year, backed up Sam Howell before that at North Carolina, as a quality guy to come in if something does happen to KJ Jefferson. I know that was a big focus for them in the offseason.
No doubt about it. And obviously, Jefferson is a really good college football quarterback. They had a top 13 offense last year per Conley. I think ESPN had them like
Mhm.
15th or 16th. And so like that's a pretty nice offensive showing for a team that didn't have their starting quarterback for 2 games, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, hobbled in the Liberty game. They do make an offensive coordinator change in the offseason. Kendall Briles went to TCU. From what I understand, like obviously he did a good job, but it sounds like they were kind of ready to part ways there, unless I'm misreading things. That go with Dan
Mhm.
Enos. What changes will we see there with this offense?
Yeah, I don't know if they were just necessarily ready to part ways. I think it was just, Kendall was flirting a lot with other jobs. It looked like he was going to go to Mississippi State. And I think, the perception of it, because they hired Dan Enos immediately, even before TCU announced Kendall Brown, just because they had him ready, because I think they maybe thought he was going to Mississippi State originally. I think you'll see a lot of the same things. You have KJ Jefferson back, so you're going to do a lot of the things that he had success with, the RPO game and stuff. What I noticed in the spring, we were able to watch 13 of the 15 spring practices. A lot of screen passes to the wide receivers, more under center play with KJ Jefferson, a lot of 2 tight end sets, 2 back sets. We didn't see that a whole lot last season at all. And a lot more throws over the middle as well. They'll also be more methodical at times. They'll also hurry up, mix it up. They'll even huddle it sometimes. But that's going to be a bit of an adjustment here and there, going under center some. I don't think you'll see it just a ton, but you'll see it a decent amount. But it's an adjustment, to KJ, but also the running backs too. The mesh points and all that stuff change. So those are some of the big things. Obviously, with KJ, personnel wise, you have KJ and you have a lot changing around him. You have Rocket Sanders back, who's a 1,400-yard rusher last season. But Jefferson, the last 2 years as a starter, has had an entirely different cast of wide receivers, and that'll be the case again this year. Again, hitting the transfer portal to address some things there. But and some new pieces on the offensive line as well. Pittman so far throughout his career at Arkansas has had returning players from the previous regime on the offensive line. And this is the first year we're going to really see some of his guys that he recruited. And that was one of the things I think that made Pittman intriguing also, was how he could, not only coach up the offensive line, but also recruit. He was known as a really big time recruiter.
Yeah.
And so this is the first time we're really seeing that put into action.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, to my eye, like being able to recruit quality offensive linemen on an annual basis because your head coach is an offensive lineman coach by trade is potentially a big advantage. They do have to replace Dalton Wagner
Mhm.
and Ricky Stromberg. Both were first team All SEC by PFF. I think they were also recognized by the conference. Who do you project to step up there?
Yeah, I think they really like Patrick Kudus. They had a bit of an issue finding the right guy there in the spring, mixing things up a whole lot. Eventually, they settled on Kudus as a former 4-star recruit, sophomore. Uh, And at the left tackle spot, it looks like Devon Manuel. And Devon Manuel is an interesting case study because this dude was not super highly recruited, even at 6'9" and a reported 390 pounds when he arrived on campus. And he has really transformed his body. He's about 310 pounds. If he looked remotely like he does now as a recruit, he would have been a national recruit, 6'9", 310 now. And so I look for him to step in there. You've got Brady Latham back, who is going to be a 4-year starter, has 36 starts under his belt. Bo Limmer moves from right guard, where he's been a multi-year starter as well, to center. And then they brought in Joshua Braun out of Florida, a guy that was committed to Sam Pittman at Georgia before Pittman took the Arkansas job. Braun went to Florida, started 1 year, redshirted last year, was more of a guard, and they were working him at tackle. I think they played a bit of a role in his decision to transfer, but it looks like he's going to fit in there at right guard. And they've got some quality younger guys too. I mean, Marion Harris, 4-star recruit, Andrew Chamblee, 4-star recruit, Takias Crawford, 4-star recruit, even though he's a senior now. But they've got some quality guys behind them. They're at 15 scholarship offensive linemen. I know Pittman would probably rather be at about 17, but all the guys, up at the top, I feel like they've got about 8 guys that they feel really good about in terms of if they needed to put them in a game that they could. They also brought in Amari Wiggins in the offseason from junior college, who's probably going to be the favorite to back up Bo Limmer at center.
It's interesting you mentioned Braun there. I was of the opinion, just as a guy that covered Florida State before I did the national thing, I thought Florida's offensive line last year was really good, and people were like, oh, he didn't start for them all the time. I think Josh Braun can play. I mean, to me, it seems like he's a pretty good player, and obviously Cody Kennedy does a really good job.
Yeah,
with their offensive line, they're a guy that gets a lot of national accolades, and I mean their numbers are always really good. So I think it's pretty deserved. On the outside, they do lose Trey Knox to South Carolina. They lose Matt Landers to, I believe, the draft, right? So
yeah,
and Warren Thompson is gone, but they went heavily like low FBS, FCS. Is it D2 A&M Commerce, or are they FCS as well?
No, 1AA. And then Hillsdale College, where Isaac Teslaw is from, is Division II. It's really interesting what they've done, and I like what they have done, actually, just from what I saw in the spring. Teslaw was a guy that played at a small Christian school in the maybe like a wishbone or a dead D offense, playing quarterback up in Michigan, and was just really overlooked. I actually asked him, I was like, do you feel like you were just overlooked? He's like, no, not really. I mean, what were they really going to go on? But just absolutely destroyed people on a Division II level and really started to come on in the spring. He's 6'4", 215, good-looking player. Andrew Armstrong from Division I AA, Texas A&M Commerce, over 1,000 yards last season, 6'4", 200. And then Tyrone Broden, who comes from Bowling Green, Group of 5 program, had over 500 yards each of the last 2 years, 6'7", 200-pound wide receiver, a guy that is a lot faster than I actually anticipated him being. I think that's an interesting group. They also have Isaiah Satania coming back, who was the top recruit in the class of 2022. Bryce Stevens, who did some good things for him. Sam Bakke, a former 4-star recruit. Jaden Wilson. What I like about the wide receivers, I would say the top 7 guys that were scholarship guys that were there in the spring, every single one of them is making a real push to start. And then losing Trey Knox, definitely a blow, but they went out and got Varkey's Gums out of North Texas. North Texas, he was a redshirt freshman last year who broke all their tight end receiving records last year. So that was a really nice get. Maybe an even actually, Knox is a senior, super senior. So Varkey's Gums just going to be a redshirt sophomore, so they'll have him some more time. They got Shamar Easter coming in, one of the top tight end prospects in the country. And Luke Haas came in the spring, who was also one of the top tight end prospects in the country. And he was really impressive, like not huge at 6'3", 238, but a guy that, can line up offline tight end. He caught a lot of passes for him. I really do like the weapons around KJ Jefferson. It's a lot of new, but he's used to new. I mean, you go back to his first year as a starter, it was Traylon Burks, Devion Warren, Tyson Morris. Last year, Jaden Hazelwood, Ketron Jackson, Matt Landers. So it's a whole new cast this year also at wide receiver, but it's something that KJ Jefferson's been used to. And his statistics really actually improved last year over the year before, even with all those changes. And really, to be honest, like losing a guy like Traylon Burks, I mean, that's a pretty big loss. And then to come back and play 11 games versus 13 and have almost the exact same statistics.
Sounds like there's probably not much drop off in this offense from year over year. At least you're not expecting so. Like maybe some room for improvement, even if Jefferson's able to stay healthy.
I mean, as long as the offensive line holds up, then I think that they're going to be pretty solid on offense. They averaged 471 yards a game last year, which, most of us, you're going to take that if I tell you
Yeah.
that. The offense wasn't really the problem last season with Arkansas's issues. It was, aside from like goal line and stuff, and they made some changes in the offseason. They weren't happy with the strength and conditioning staff, and, basically moved on immediately after the Missouri game because they were having so many issues at goal line and short yardage for an offensive line that was supposed to be one of the best in the country. Couldn't get a push and a 245-pound quarterback. So they made a change with the strength coach, obviously. But, offense, as far as moving the ball up the field, that wasn't a big issue with this team. Last year, it was defense that was the big problem. But I think the offense will continue to click.
Defensively, they did take a decent step back last year. They were like 50s or 60s.
Decent step.
Yeah. I felt like one of their issues was, and we talked about it, you were very honest about this last year on summer school. If you go back and do the listen, which I try to listen to all the summer schools from the prior year.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, they may not have that dude in the middle of the defense that they've had in prior seasons, and I think that turned out to be true. They didn't have like a crazy difference maker there on the defensive interior. They did have some really good players, like Drew Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
I think was better for them than anybody could have actually expected. Like you were high on him, obviously, and a highly rated transfer recruit, but he went absolutely nuts. They lose him. They lose Bumper Poole, who I feel like has played at Arkansas for at least a decade, and they lose Zach Williams and Isaiah Nichols, who played a decent number of snaps, but maybe weren't big time impact guys. How are they going to replace those dudes? And what do you expect? Like a drop off? Can they be better than they were last year?
Yeah, well, Zach Williams is back, actually. He's a super senior, so he's back. Bud, they did a great job in the transfer portal. You're starting with the defensive line. They have 9 seniors on the defensive line. I don't know if that's ever happened in the 85 scholarship age. They're a solid 3 deep from what I saw in the spring and the guys that are coming in. I mean, you lost Isaiah Nichols, obviously, but you've got Eric Gregory coming back, who's moving from an odd front defensive end to the interior. He's been 6'4", 300 plus his whole career. I think he's been a little out of position. So he moves inside. You have Taurean Carter back. You have Cameron Ball back, who's a really promising redshirt sophomore. You brought in Keevy Rose, who is all conference at Louisiana Tech. You brought in Anthony Tank Booker from Maryland, who was a 4-star transfer, graded guy, 6'4", 320 pounds. You've got Marcus Miller back also. You go a solid 6 deep, and I'm talking like veteran players on the defensive interior. And then at defensive end, it's the same thing. You have Landon Jackson back, who was, a former top 100 recruit who transferred in the year before last. And, he's 6'7", 270 pounds, looked really good in the spring. He was coming off an ACL, probably was about 3/4 speed last year. So you have him. You have Trajan Jeffcoat, who is a former all-SEC first-team player at Missouri, 6'4", 280. You have Zach Williams back, as I mentioned. You have Jashad Stewart back. You have John Morgan, who they brought in from Pitt, another senior defensive lineman. You go a solid, and you have Nico Dabier back, who's a really intriguing sophomore player. You go a solid 3 deep at defensive end, a solid 3 deep in the interior. That's a great start. And I'm talking like seniors, guys who've been through the wars. I really like this defensive line, and I like it better than I liked it last year also. Obviously, Drew Morgan, replacing him is tough at linebacker. 3rd-round NFL draft pick, had 9.5 sacks last year. Bumper Poole was really banged up a lot of last year, especially the second half of the season, had some hip issues. And Christopher Paul played an extensive amount. I think Christopher Paul, to me, is a guy that is going to be like a spokesperson of this program. Really well, does a great job in interviews. You can tell he's really driven. Great parents, raised the right way, guy that was surrounded by sisters, just a good kid all the way around. Had 4 sacks last year, 8 tackles for loss, 60 plus tackles. So they've got him back. They brought in Antonio Greer from South Florida. They brought in Jaheim Thomas, who had like 80 tackles, I think, last year for Cincinnati. So I think they've got some young guys like Jordan Crook and Manny Powell, guys I think are really promising young players, but they don't have to just be thrown in the fire anymore because they've done so well in the transfer portal, bringing in Greer, bringing in Thomas, plus, having Pooh Paul back. I really like the interior, what they have going on. I think the front 7 is actually going to be pretty strong. Now, you're probably going to ask me about the secondary now. They were 131 out of 131 teams last year in pass defense.
I'm going to be kind of positive here about the secondary, I think, because I felt like every time I looked, Arkansas was missing yet another defensive back
Yeah,
due to injury last year, and they only took one transfer, right? So like that
yeah.
has to. I'm a big believer,
No,
Trey.
no, they took more than one transfer.
At the DB position.
Oh
Who else
yeah,
they took?
oh yeah, they loaded
I'm
up.
sorry.
They had so many guys leave. I mean, and that's something we were told. Sam Pittman told us before the transfer portal happened. Buckle up. And they had over 25 guys into the transfer portal. I would say only 5 of those guys would be like, that kind of stinks. The others, I mean, a lot of those are problems from the 2020 recruiting class where they had the quick turnaround. 2021, they had some good players in 2021, but they had a lot
It
of
was a
real
COVID
misses.
class.
Yeah, the
It was like
2020
blind
class was the
dating.
quick turnaround class. The 2021 class was where you couldn't go out and evaluate players.
Right.
So the transfer portal came along at the right time, and the immediate eligibility came along at the right time for Arkansas. Anybody who's complaining about transfer portal is insane if they're an Arkansas fan, because it's been really good to them, and they needed it because they'd be sunk with 2020, 2021 classes. But they had a ton of defensive backs. This is how. So they were just getting decimated by injuries in the secondary. They had Jalen Catalon, who was a preseason All-American, go down the first game. Miles Slusher only played 6 games. Malik Chavis was injured off and on all season. Latavius Brini, who was a transfer from Georgia, played injured all season. They had just one guy after another. It was so bad. Like out of all the guys that transferred out, none of them could take over a starting spot over Quincy McAdoo. Quincy McAdoo was a true freshman wide receiver. They moved it mid-season to cornerback, and then he started the last 4 games at cornerback. People talk about being scared of all these guys leaving that are defensive backs. Where's the guys that could come in and start over a freshman wide receiver at cornerback?
Right.
To me, they didn't lose a lot. Now, Jalen Catalon, the guy's played in 1 game out of the last 20 for Arkansas because of shoulder issues. Yeah, really great player if he's healthy, but he was never healthy. And Miles Slusher, had a lot of injuries. Those are 2 guys I would say, you'd like to have those guys back, especially if they can stay healthy.
Or the potential of those guys.
Right, the potential of those guys. But what they went out and did, they went out and got Alfahim Walcott out of Baylor, who was Baylor's second leading tackler from the safety position last year, 6'2", 215. He'll play nickel for Arkansas. They got Lorando Johnson, a former 4-star recruit who also started for Baylor last year. You probably know Baylor was second in the Big 12 last year in pass defense.
Yeah.
So they've got 2 starters from Baylor coming in. They got Jaheim Singletary out of Georgia, former 5-star recruit in the class of 2022. They got Keon, I'm spacing on his name, that came from TCU, played for TCU last year. Got him. AJ Brathwaite from Western Kentucky also. So they brought in a lot. Plus, they got Dwight McLaughlin back, who I think is an all-SEC caliber player. He's second.
And an awesome interview, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, Dwight is.
Yeah.
Dwight's liable to say something.
Oh, yeah.
He's hilarious.
Especially on the field. You should see some of the stuff that goes on in practice. This dude loves to talk. But they got him back. Quincy McAdoo was injured in a car accident. We don't know what his status is, but it does not look good. Like he'll be available for this season. But they get Ladarius Bishop back, who started in 2021, I think 7 or 8 games for him and was injured all last year. I think the secondary is going to be a lot better. But the main thing, in addition to the transfers that they've added, is bringing in Marcus Woodson. Marcus Woodson, when he was at Florida State, they had one of the worst pass defenses in the country the year before he came, and I think they were 6th nationally last year. So he really helped lead a turnaround there, and hopefully can do that for Arkansas, because they were, like I said, 131 in the country in passing yards surrendered last year. Just a disaster. And what's crazy is they were one of the best sack teams in the country. They were getting to the quarterback, but could not stop the pass. And a large part of that was so many injuries. Also got Hudson Clark back. I should mention him, a guy that can play any spot in the secondary. So I think they're going to be better, but brought in Marcus Woodson, Travis Williams, also the new defensive coordinator who's going to coach linebackers, and Darren Wilson, I think, was a really nice upgrade for him. They list those guys as secondary coaches. They flip back and forth, but I think he was a really nice upgrade for him over the previous cornerbacks coach.
Seems like a lot of reasons to be optimistic here about.
I think so.
Arkansas
I think they
year.
did some damage in the transfer portal.
Yeah.
I really do. And the thing you have to be cautious about, and if you watch my last year one, you probably remember me saying this, was, last year I looked at the team. They brought in 8 transfers. Every single one of them was a major contributor for Arkansas. And I looked across the board at the starting lineup. I'm like, man, it's a really good looking team. But you have to obviously understand that everybody else at Ole Miss is doing that too. They're not just bringing in a freshman or redshirt freshman to fill in a spot here. They've got a veteran out of the transfer portal to fill in there. And I think what Arkansas and Sam Pittman learned from that is all these dudes played a ton for us. So let's go out and get twice as many. And now let's build for depth. And now you see, like I said, a 3 deep on the defensive line. Really good. This is the first time I've been covering Arkansas, and I feel like 20 years where I've been like, man, they got 9 scholarship linebackers, really good shape. They've always seemed thin at linebacker for some reason. And addressed a lot of things in the secondary. I think that they have really used the transfer portal to not only, put out a great starting group, but also build for depth. And that, Bud, is, to me, been one of the big differences between Arkansas and some of the upper echelon teams in the SEC. When you get to the fourth quarter, you've got linebackers out there who can't breathe because you haven't subbed them out all game, because the second team guy is not as good as, your starter at 70% capacity, just because you haven't had the depth. And so I think that's something, and also, throughout the course of the season, when you get to the second half of the season, you get some guys banged up and stuff, because it's not just about your second team, it's about your third team, because you got to rely on a third team guy too. And so I think that's something where Arkansas is really going to be able to close the gap. And again, thank goodness for the transfer portal for Arkansas, because I really think they would be like, we'd be talking about Sam Pittman's job right now if it weren't for the transfer portal.
Trey, I think that's the lesson I'm seeing so far. Like I put out blue chip ratio the other day, and it's there's not a lot of like crazy high level players in the portal, but there's a lot of somewhere between above average to good, very good players. And like that's what the best teams out there are doing. For every Drew Sanders, there's 7 or 8 guys that can help your football team either be like, hey, maybe he's a low end starter for you, but at least he's a starter, or he's a very high end backup. And if you have the resources to go out, and get that, that's a huge help. I look at this schedule, and like immediately in the odd numbered years, I don't like it for Arkansas because of the fact that the A&M game counts as one of their home games within the league. But on the other hand,
Arkansas just creating a disadvantage for themselves, competitive disadvantage by their own scheduling.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, I think this schedule is very conducive to winning 8 or maybe 9 games, because the 2 hardest games are the games that you would be an underdog at home or away, right? At LSU, at Bama. If you played both those games at Arkansas, like Arkansas is still a dog there. You get very winnable home games. I mean, Western Carolina is a dub. Kent State, I think, is the worst FBS team I've ever rated in the preseason. Like they're like Nevada, Hawaii bad from last year. BYU lost an awful lot, including the quarterback, who I know was hurt last year. But
let's go over those next 4 though, Bud.
Well, okay, now that is
where
tough,
they are,
right? Yeah, like you don't come home for a month. This is
35 days.
Yeah, at LSU, A&M on a neutral site, which should have won that game last year, I thought. At Ole Miss, at Bama. If they come out of that stretch with a winning record, I think they're feeling okay, because then like there's a reasonable shot that they could run the table from there. Like not a great one, but
you talking about those 4 games with a winning record, or are you talking about
no.
Overall?
Like if you get through the first 7 games with a winning record, like if you're 4-3 at that point, right? Which means you didn't slip up to BYU, you either beat Ole Miss or A&M. Hell, if you go 5-2, like I think you're over the moon, honestly. But the final stretch is very winnable. Like Mississippi State,
read those 5 off,
Mississippi State at Florida, Auburn, FIU, which got rocked in the portal again, and Missouri. I think Arkansas is favored in 7 with a reasonable chance, to. When I look at my projections, I have them finishing somewhere between 5-7 and 10-2. That's kind of the range. Now 10-2, 5-7.
That's quite a range.
Yeah, like they're really out, but they play a lot of competitive games. Like I'm probably bumping it up more after this call, given the fact that they do have a lot more depth than I realized. It's a weird, it's a schedule to be hard to win the West, but it's a very manageable schedule as far as if you can try to win 8 or 9 ball games. Like that's very doable with this, I think.
Yeah. And the only weakness I see with this team, I would have liked to have seen them go out and just get a true stud safety. Now they got Al Walcott, who's going to play nickel, but I feel like they needed one more safety, and they got some good players, but I think it makes sense for them to move maybe Lorando Johnson to safety. He's a pretty good tackle from the cornerback position. All those positions are now basically interchangeable, but that's the only area that I look at and say this is maybe a bit of a weakness for them, where they're not just super deep, super strong. But when you talk about that schedule, the first 3 games, I think they should win all 3 of those games. It's the next 4 where it gets tricky, and you got to win one of those. Or obviously, if you win 2 of those, that'd be great. That would be fantastic, because the last 5, I think, are all very winnable. You never know what's going to happen throughout the course of the season, but I don't think 9 wins is out of the question for this team. 8 may be maybe what I settle on a little bit with the possibility to win a bowl game. But I really like the makeup of the team. I like them having KJ Jefferson back, a 1,400-yard rusher, several other, like every back is back. Like every back from last year is back, plus Dominic Johnson's going to be healthy. I like this team a lot. And I try to, step back and say, what do I dislike about this team? But when I build out like 3 deep depth charts and stuff, and special teams, they got Cam Littleback, who's a fantastic kicker also. When I look at this team, I think they're pretty solid all throughout. Again, I'd like to see a little more safety, but I think they've done a good enough job in the transfer portal, bringing in cornerbacks where they can shift some things around and make a good quality starting 5 out there. But it's that 4-game stretch where it's ridiculous, really. And then after that, you get Mississippi State at home, and I think maybe there's a bye week after that, and then you're off to Florida, which, by the way, they'll have played Florida 4 out of the last 5 times in Gainesville, which is absurd, but that's the schedule that Arkansas
easy
gets.
place to play, right? Of course.
Oh yeah, Arkansas's never won there.
Arkansas does kind of get like sneakily screwed by the SEC with some of the scheduling stuff.
Well, the 10-game SEC schedule in 2020, like Arkansas hadn't won an SEC game in like 19 tries, and instead of just like hooking them up a little bit, they go, well, we're going to give you we're going to give you Georgia out of the gate, and we're going to ship you off to Florida. And that's when Florida was like top 10.
Right.
So like those are the 2 games that you get added. So yeah, they didn't do Arkansas any favors by any stretch.
That is brutal. Trey, I really appreciate the time today, man, and putting up with my voice here.
Yeah.
We'll everybody go check out HawgSports. I think the walk and talk you do is awesome, dude. I learned an awful lot, and it's raw and it's honest, just genuine football coverage from you guys over there, and we enjoy it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Bud.
All right, man.